And you could record too, Tula, on yours. Hey everyone, this is Tula and I, Maten, and we're doing this probably on my channel, but we may do it on our combined channel. What's the name of our combined channel, Tula? I already forgot. Evening of the
The
Magician?
Evening of the Magicians. There, you got it.
And
It's like the Twilight of the Gods, only different.
what would you say that's what's that from? That's Nietzsche's, one of Nietzsche's books
That's
has that
Nietzsche.
title.
Yeah.
Okay. And Wagner too, right? Doesn't Wagner have a song called Twilight of the Gods?
Or a whole opera, perhaps? I think
I think it's
so.
an opera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wagner's an interesting topic. So we're going to talk today about what are we going to talk about, Tola? What did we decide?
Let's do a part one and we're kind of fleshed out a bit more. I've been really intrigued by human design. I'm in no means, I mean, Mario really kind of turned me on to it. I knew what it was before, very vaguely. But upon reading it,
Maybe
I
show the
kind of
book.
want to
Maybe show
talk
the book real quick so they could see. Mine's on the shelf somewhere. I don't want to grab it. The
The
pro
Prophecy of Ra Uru Hu,
Ra Uru
based
Hu.
on a true encounter by Steve Rhodes. And I like this book that Mario recommended to me, and it's kind of like the Cliff Notes. It's the Cliff Notes, right, of human design. And I already had watched the video of how Ra receives, the information, the transmission. And then, but when I started reading about the future as prophesied by Ra, I was like, wait a second. I really want to talk about this because I don't, I don't want to trash a whole system that is so genius and fits together so well and is also incredibly useful for navigating everyday life. But I want to talk about the fact that certain levels, when people get to a certain level, whether it's Raw, whether it's entertainers, whether it's politicians, are they really saying what they've come up with, or are we just always under these forces that the bigger we get, we're kind of getting this archonic um, attachment that is telling us how it's going to go? And I kind of want to explore this because I think this is what happened with Raw. And I'll just really quickly start off by saying if you
Well,
don't know what the Archons,
I
should
was
we
going to
start
just
with
give a
there?
quick quasi introduction, but if you're just finishing yours, go ahead.
Do it, do it. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
do it.
so just for all the viewers, this is in a sense a continuation of the live talks that I had with Nancy. Me and Nancy did two videos, and then I did one with Gary, and all three of those videos kind of touched. Mostly, I think the videos with Nancy, we started talking about this book as well, and we started getting into what kind of programming is this? Is this some kind of archontic program that's being shared that Ra kind of ha had been overlaid with? And so we're kind of continuing this with Tula's insights upon reading the same book.
And we both just finished reading VALIS from Philip K. Dick, so it's kind of the same concept I want to kind of like bring in here because um, you know, for so much of human design, people are like, oh, I'm a manifesting generator, or I have this gate open, or woo, or yes, I can. And I was like, oh, this is cool, this is cool. It seems very accurate. And then you read this book and you're like, but wait, our ultimate goal in this life is we all turn into these triangles that just inhabit Oberon, and we become one consciousness, and that's just it. We're done evolving, and we're the cell of this creature. And to me, it just screams archonic kind of planning. The same way that when I see Bill Gates rubbing his hands with glee, oh, and there will be a next pandemic, I kind of get that same feeling. And because I don't feel that I very strongly intuitively do not believe that human beings work like this. And I believe that while so much of what Rob was given was accurate, but I believe part of it was he is being channeled basically by an archon. And this is kind of their dream. And we can kind of talk about the medical interventions that are obviously forcing the rave, which we all see happening in 2027. And so I kind of want to discuss this because there's a lot of wiggle room here for humans to remain human. And we don't necessarily need to have our ultimate future being a triangle made of silica on the moon of Oberon, right? And I want to address this because I feel like I was like, this is like the elephant in the room. Like, I don't care if I'm a manifesting generator, if I'm just going to end up locked for eternity in this giant sphere that to me sounds like Steiner's eighth sphere, which is basically kind of the metaverse. So we kind of want to discuss this. What is when people come to a certain level, I'll give a good example.
Well,
Mario and
let
I
me
were
introduce
talking.
a deeper concept before you do.
Yeah,
So just for
yeah.
everyone listening, we're talking also about the split of 2025 or 2026, and we're talking about the books of Philip K. Dick because Philip K. Dick kind of proposes visual possibilities of this split, what it looks like, what a split consciousness and awareness looks like in a human body through his books, VALIS, Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, and The Man in the High Castle, and various other books. But really succinctly, and I think in Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, he presents these two realities that, like a Venn diagram, the character walks in and out of. And in a way, I would propose that Ra is symbolic of one of these characters because he's a human living in the human world, and all of a sudden he gets this transmission, and it's almost like a Valis, right? It's almost like the vast, active, right? It's what the character Horse Lover Fat in Valis gets, is he gets this transmission, and the whole rest of the novel by Philip K. Dick and Valis is his experiences of alternating between two different realities. And it seems very similar with Ra, who was living in normal everyday reality and had a successful business. And then all of a sudden, while driving his, I think, Cadillac he went to a convenience liquor store to grab something, and he left his car on, and he ran out of the liquor store to a train station and took a train to take a flight to go to Europe. And he left his car running. It's crazy. And he had this impulse.
Right.
And he went to Europe, and then he went to Spain, and then he went to Ibiza, and then he started living there. And then after a certain period of years or months, he had the transmission. So just like in Valis, there's these episodes or like psychic episodes that happen to him that causes him to go further away and take the leap to some other form of conscious awareness. And so I propose that Ra is almost like one of these characters in a Philip K. Dick novel who had to contend with competing realities. Because he had this reality that he was in, and just like the short story Wakefield by Nathaniel Hawthorne, he leaves his everyday mundane reality and jumps across densities into another reality, then gets a transmission which changes the color of his right eye, his moon eye, and then he starts to communicate this entire system, and then he continues to live his life writing and presenting this system in a scientific way. He's very clear on that. He needs to present it so it doesn't get scooped up into like new age programming. And so he presents it to the world, but the way he presents the information is very strange, right? Because it's with a scientific frame. And then that's where it all blows up because he's describing how our bodies work. But is he describing how our bodies work or describing how they're going to work relative to certain programming that's coming online? You know what I'm saying? There's layers of this, but I'm just putting into different words what you and I have been talking about for the last hour before we started recording. So I'll stop there. Does that kind of give a good contextualization?
Yeah. And I think the other thing we should mention too for people that don't, really know or may want like a quick rundown is like, in Gnosticism, you have these archons that basically are the this force that kind of takes over the planet. They're like the overlay. And when you really start looking into the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls, the references are really, really crazy to basically what is happening. And in VALIS, Philip K. Dick is kind of talking about it. He refers to it as the Black Iron Prison, right? It's an overlay that of this, a control system. And in his exegesis, Philip K. Dick basically says, either we have to dismantle this overlay or we have to escape this planet. And it's very Matrix, right? It's the Matrix is telling you the same thing. And so I really love this Gnostic scholar who's still around. He's very vocal on Convid. He talks about it a lot as it being one of the biggest deceits ever, second only to the Roman takeover of the Gnostics. So the Gnostics were basically like they include the Cathars and the Druids and they were all slaughtered. And it's important, right, to realize that they just rejected this master-slave relationship. So, which when we have these relationships with our government or our doctors or, our teachers or police, they're all our Orthodox religion is all coming from this master-slave relationship. And the Gnostics and a lot of the pagans and all these nature-based societies have this mutual reception where it's like we're working with the living cosmos and it's a give and take relationship. And when you really look at these structures in your life, I mean, even like, AA is based on, we were talking about this, I think, last time, where even if you don't believe in a God, they force you to pick a higher power, so you're giving your power away. And that was really fundamental to the Gnostics. Like when you keep, praying, like, thank you, like you're really giving away a lot of your own power because you basically are this kind of hologram of God. So, one of the things that John Lamb talks about when he goes into the Nag Hammadi is he talks about the Archons, and there's a part that he talks about where he's basically transcribing from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he's saying these creatures are made of silicone. This is why he originally, and forgive me here, even though like, I'm obsessed with this guy and I love his lectures, I never remember if it's Lamb or Lamb Lash, so I'm gonna mess it up. But you can find him. But he literally translates part of the Dead Sea Scrolls to what these archons want is they want to inhabit the human body, which is why you have this huge push for transhumanism, right? Because they are not in the living cosmos with us. They're outside of it, but they are basically, he kind of talks about how it appears that they put this mind virus, like the Wetiko, that Paul Levy talks about, and they're trying to control our consciousness. So when Lashlam goes to this very specific spot where he's like, they want everything to become silicon. Then he also has a great talk, maybe we can link to also Mario somewhere, where he talks about AI is never going to be uh, sentient in this way because it's not moist. It's not wet. It's not like, we're in amniotic fluid. We're born of fluid, into the womb and the sperm and, like when you kiss someone or when you eat, it's these sensations of moistness. So the first kind of red flag for me reading this book about Ra, and when he talks about how he's receiving this transmission, is that he literally is deprived of water. Like the voice, let's see if I actually recorded
The
what
water
he
falls
says.
from his body.
He
His
becomes
dog
super
passes out,
dehydrated.
and like a bunch of
Right.
water just falls out of his body.
Right. It literally says, here we go. Says he hears the voice as the dog crashed and the lantern spun. His body exploded with water. It was gushing from his head, arms, legs, and groin. There was literally a pool of body water on the floor. The physical sensation of super fast dehydration is pain. And this emergence of pain was the voice, and it said, "Are you ready to work?" So to me, I was like, wait a second. Why would it make him absent of water? Now, this is like a thing in with the archons because they are not wet. They are not moist like humans. Maybe Marty, you want to kind of elaborate a little bit too about that because that was my first kind of red flag. I'm like, I don't think. And then Ra's also tricked, right? Doesn't the voice trick him? When he's talking to the Englishman, it says something as well. The voice does like a trick on him. And to me, I'm like, okay, he's getting accurate. Oh, yeah. Afterwards, the voice tricked Ra. It said to Ra, tell the Englishman that you can give him the crystal that belongs to him. Ra had to tell them to come back this very evening for this. And the voice told Ra to throw them out, and that's what he did. So to me, I don't think this is an authentic transmission from something necessarily that is what we would call good. It sounds like a plan, like an archonic plan. And of course, I know this will be unpopular because, yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by human design. Like, I think it's really,
We
and
both are. I mean, a lot of us are. And so,
yeah,
but we're looking at it as neutral as possible, as
right,
without judgment as possible. It's just observation. And as you're doing, as we're both doing, like comparing, because that's all we know through comparison. That's only way, one of the only ways we know things,
right,
but
right,
also, of course, through our metaphysical insights. But what it is that this is fascinating because at the end of this, he stares at the sun for hours. And so what sun does he stare at?
right,
One question. And then when the friends come, when the Englishman comes back that evening, I think it's that evening that something horrible happens and he starts like throwing up or something, getting sick. And I don't know if that was earlier, I can't remember. But there's weird, like he's also like becoming dehydrated.
right,
And it's all very he was, well, I mean, I think this is now known. I mean, he was on ketamine, he was on drugs.
right.
He was
Which
a
is
drug
another thing
addict his
as
whole life,
well.
pretty
Which is
much.
another thing as well, because I mean, when you look at who's the most prominent person in popular culture right now talking about their ketamine use, it's Elon Musk. And this kind of ties into where I'm just getting kind of these red flags set off for me that this is maybe not the purest of transmissions. This is not necessarily how we have to end up as these triangle shaped silicon one hive mind consciousness for
Well, the
eternity.
proposition is that there's a split. I mean, we're getting this, and I don't know if this is programmed as well, but we're getting these messages that there's a split, right? We talked about both getting the Sammy Hagar feed, that he wrote a song in 1975.
Right,
In the lyrics to the song, he says, there's a split coming in 25. Which way will you go? Something like that. And I looked up the lyrics, and sure enough, it's there, you
right.
know. And, I don't know that this is a Mandela effect. It's too late, to look back now. But that's very, very strange, inserted or otherwise confirmation that as what Philip K. Dick proposes in his books, something that Ra doesn't propose at all, right? He just says, this is the reality and that's it. This is the construct, this is the realm, this is what it is. But it just seems to me that on some level, he himself was a fractured representation of this perception of consciousness because here he is as a human. He gets this transmission in a form of a possession, in a form of in his context, a design crystal that sits for the rest of his life in his, brainstem or, somewhere in his mind, and it communicates to him constantly. So here we have a human with some like foreign installation, some alien installation, and he's discussing and sharing this deep insight on how our bodies work. And then if you bring into that, we'll bring in a third item is the depth books that were written in Russia and came out in the 70s. And those books talk a lot about all these like foreign installations into the human body as being, especially into the human subtle layers, as being non-human or you know what I mean, or like put in to control us. It proposed that the chakra system was something like that. Now, these are all like very controversial ideas. I mean, many healers and many, you know, seers talk about the chakras as just, it's just a part of what we're working with, because we can put any kind of slant we want on this. And we know that this is the confusion and the conflation of what we're presenting. It's not to say, it's to say that something seems natural and unnatural. It seems like we're definitely in our conversation creating that dichotomy, that there's a natural way that humans evolve and develop. And there seems to be an unnatural direction of human evolvement that's seeming to be presented as natural. And that's
Right.
what we would say that how Ra's presenting things. Oh, it's natural that we're going to evolve into silicone, triangular shaped disk that float around on the moon system of the planet Jupiter. It all sounds
Oberon.
very wild.
Oberon.
What's
No,
that?
it's Oberon where we become the final triangles
Is
that
Oberon a planet or a moon of Jupiter?
it's a moon of that's interesting.
I'm
I
pretty
got
sure it's a moon of Jupiter because Jupiter is a big part of the narrative as well,
I think
as is Sirius,
we
as is
leave
Sirius and Valis as well by Philip K. Dick.
right, let's see. Oberon planet.
And Philip K. Dick too has shady associations. I mean, he seems to be actively involved in, alphabet agencies.
Oh, it's the second largest and outermost moon of Uranus.
Oh, of Uranus.
Hmm.
So not Jupiter.
Not Jupiter. We go to Jupiter first, which Swedenborg and I think Rudolph Steiner also say. And a couple things here. Well, first off, I just want to mention that when we see people, for example, like when I see people like Gates or Musk or Trump or any of these people, to me, like I feel like it's so unknown that Hitler was learning how to channel for 10 years previously before he became the chancellor. He was visiting a guy called Karl Haushofer, and Haushofer was an initiate from the Himalayan mystery schools. So Hesse and Hitler were driving for hours every weekend to learn how to channel. And if you really start looking into some of the more occult influence of the Nazis, it's their whole campaign was learning how to channel dark forces through them. You can look up Haushofer, and he actually wrote, I guess, some books in Germany um, that they're not available in English, but I feel like some freedom person should translate them. And it's very clear that that's what is happening. And I see this is happening today. I mean, we all know that everyone is in these mystery schools. The world is basically run by dark sorcerers. And I would just argue that when you get to a certain level, you kind of getting taken over by these archonic forces, especially if you're doing like ketamine or an artificial man-made drug. There's a really famous psychiatrist called Jerry Marzinski, and he was the psychiatrist at Rikers Island for like 25 years. And he basically came to the point where he was like, schizophrenia and insanity is basically it's possession by spirits. And he talked about how drug use, especially this artificial drug use, seemed to really correlate. And so that's kind of another strike there against Ra, because ketamine, like I said, it's again this archonic drug. It's not the real true drug like mushrooms or, a plant.
It's not natural. It's another layer of, yeah.
Right. And herbalists always talk about how, when you take a plant for an infection, the death cycle is built into the plant. So, the side effects, there's not these side effects because there's the plant grows and it dies and it's all built in. But ketamine is lacking this natural structure. It's kind of a pale version of what we're taking. It doesn't have the intuition that a plant does, which is the natural intelligence of the cosmos. So if you're taking a lot of ketamine and you receive this transmission, I think you're kind of receiving this transmission. And it's very clear when you read the cosmology, because like, I went on to read the Night of Brahma and the Bardo where Ra is talking. I'm like, how come people are never talking about this? Like it's very dark. And he keeps on saying, like, oh, you have no choice. You're just a passenger. You're just along for the ride. And I would argue that The Gnostics believe that that's not true. And breaking out of that paradigm, believing that you have control as a human being that's sovereign, is part of gnosis and waking up. So I just don't, the same way that I reject that Christianity tells me I'm going to hell if I don't accept Jesus, it's kind of along the same lines that I'm like, I don't want to be a triangle made of silicon fucking orbiting a moon on Uranus. I feel like I have more agency as a human being than that. And I do feel like this is an archonic deception. When Mario, we're talking about the last Stephen King book, which is very almost, there's parts of it that read um, like Big Pharma literally has placed an ad in this book. And Mario brought up a really good point. He's like, well, maybe Stephen King wasn't paid off by Big Pharma. Perhaps he was just possessed by this larger archonic force. And I would just argue that this is how humans are. Like when we live in these worlds that aren't grounded and not in community and not based around plant medicine, we're creating all these kind of tears in the etheric body, and what we're seeing now is basically these large political figureheads being controlled by these archonic forces that want to have a human body. And that's what the Gnostics told us thousands of years ago. That's what every ancient text tells us. That's why the Bible is literally a warning. It's not about God or Christianity. It's a warning about these dark forces that just take over. And people don't, they want to be like, oh, Trump, he's just a dickhead. But what if he's just taken over by this archonic force that wants to create transhumanism?
One of the largest memes of modern times, of course, is, from the film They Live, right? You have I took out the t-shirt yesterday, but I don't have it, but you have that alien head, right? Where once Roddy Piper puts on the sunglasses, he can see that some humans are not human,
Right.
something else. And one thing in the film that it shows is like all the leaders are pretty much the monsters. And that, of course, the frequency radar that's on top of the building that he manages to somehow destroy at the end, right? That's holding a certain frequency so they can't be seen. So these archontic forces can't be seen and are being seen as human deceptively when there's something else. And, it's fascinating to me analyzing the movement of the outer planets through the centuries, right? When we first recognized, I think, Neptune, or, during a significant transit, we had the birth of film. So
Hmm.
what is film? Film is a process by which we replicate the image of what it looks like to be human. So we create film, and film, as Neptune symbolizes, is a form of fluid that animates and creates a reality. So we watch movies as if they're a reality, and as we watch it, our consciousness moves from our body into the image as we start to live in that image and live out the cycle of the main characters. And what's really interesting to me, of course, is Neptune represents spiritual enlightenment, but it also represents spiritual deception and delusion. And so we have
Just
this.
the word film, like if there's a film over your eyes, or if there's a film on the surface of the water, it's something covering up the actual real true thing that's behind it? And we see this language like TV programming and television, and like we're so deep in it that we just don't question these illusions, and how much do we know is real? Like they've done a lot of studies. When people watch things in movies, our brains react whether this event is real or not. Like the same neurons fire and we activate the same fear and pain centers. And when you really start to kind of, it's unnerving to kind of break out of this um matrix that we're in, because when you start, and this is I think why a lot of people don't want to question things, because you can start off questioning the necessary medical interventions of 2021, right? But then you have to go down into like, well, what do I really know is true? We don't even know who we are as humans. And we're kind of being brought further and further into this world where we watch people play sports and most likely most of that is false. And then we're ingesting chemicals and, then we watch sports where, most of the commercials are for pharmaceuticals and for like house cleaning chemicals. It's like it's not, it's kind of this alternate illusion. It's this overlay. Like, what really are we as humans? And how much
So,
power do we have?
so we're encouraged to see with gilded eyes, meaning to say that eyes that don't perceive beyond the image, in a sense, or through the image, to see the deception that's fabricating the illusion that's proposed against us. Or in reverse, these films are being created to elicit an awakening in our own third eye perception so that we bring these illusory images into our third density reality. So in a sense, it's this, and this is a very interesting way of looking at it, I think, is to consider that this Neptunian invention of film is a practice by which we're being used to morph or shift our third density reality into something else. But ironically, at the same time, as a form of, I don't know, teaching almost, we're also learning how to do that ourselves. Because if we have that kind of power, that means by our own imagination and visualization techniques, we too can retain connections with others, through the heart, with others in our life through our own visualization boundaries using imagery and colors, and thus creating our own reality, ignoring the Wedico, right? Ignoring the mind that's not ours. And instead of living in our thoughts and living in fears or in the past or in the future, somehow create a presence where we are visually constructing our own architecture that protects us but doesn't separate us from the connection with those around us. And for those of us who studied, whether it's Toltec shamanism or energy work or, whatever it is, whatever system, whatever new age system, but that actually works, that actually really anchors the human biofield into the earth or into, the source at the same time, or, one or the other. There's so many different perspectives on it. But but what I propose here too, because I want to stay on the side of solution as well, is that we are living in some kind of density where when we look outside into nature, we start to see the most potent and the most kind of we look at an environment that has the most veracity by seeing these trees and this green. And it's something it does to our consciousness to see green and to see these trees because supposedly trees exist in all densities. And so this is something that's almost eternalized. And so by not always feeding, I think it's okay to watch movies and stuff because like you said, we're experiencing things on a certain layer. Virtual reality is already occurring, right? Think about it. It's already occurring because, as you said, the same synapses, the same adrenaline is flowing as if we're the main character of the story. So we're engaging and we're constantly experiencing multiple densities of reality, whether we're in nature, watching a movie, or interacting with another person. And so the question to me is like, can we have all these experiences of adversity and at the same time stay connected to what's eternal, to what's natural? Can we? Because it seems wherever we turn, whatever the old or ancient or new system or literature or film, it all is the same. It's all seems to be always projecting a new movie for us to star in. And the movie always is weirder than the last one. And the latest movie is like, let's star as trans, human monsters, I don't know, it's something, right?
Right.
And that's what it is. That's the latest movie that's playing. And that's what we're talking about here is like, is this a role that we've chosen for ourselves? Who's writing the script?
Right. And this is something also that, when yeah, you see all these Marvel movies and it's kind of this like almost preliminary, look at like how great gene editing could be. You could just have these. But is this something that we are organically making this choice, And the argument of having these two systems, I just want to kind of read something here from VALIS, from Philip K. Dick, because kind of building on what we were talking about, the two suns and the two alternate systems, right? Philip K. Dick says the name of the healthy twin, Hyperverse 1, is Nomo. And the name of the sick twin, Hyperuniverse 2, is Urugu. These names are known to the Dogon people of Western Sudan and Africa. The primordial source of all religions lies with the ancestors of the Dogon tribe, who got their cosmology and directly from the three-eyed invaders who visited long ago. They were mute, deaf, and telepathic, could not breathe their atmosphere, had the elongated, misshapen skull of Iknaton, and emanated from a planet in the star system Sirius. Although they had no hands, but they had instead pincher claws, such as a crab has, they were great builders. They covertly influence our history towards a fruitful end. So, you know, I know we touched on the last thing how Philip K. Dick did have a dead twin. He was convinced that he was this guy named Thomas in Roman times, and he could see himself wandering around as Thomas, which the name Thomas has a didactic root for twin. Of course, there's the twin suns. There's, of course, the Christ consciousness and the Son of God, and right. So all this kind of evidence for two systems, and so when I wonder when Ra starts prophesizing in human design about the raves and how animals are going to um, walk away from humans and how the raves are going to become telepathic and we're just going to kind of be these surrogate breeders for them, like I don't necessarily know, like, because it's very clear to me, as it is probably to a lot of people, that the number one podcast in this country is like the telepathy tapes, right? About autistic children being having these telepathic abilities. So what is causing this though? And I think if we all, if we live in this world where we're being fed toxins and poisoned and fed like, fake meat and the animals are injected with mRNA and, the kids are getting all these medical interventions. Like, how can you call this a natural process when it's obviously been influenced by people that seem to be taken over by archons, by archonic influence, right? I don't think the emergence of the raves is this natural, beautiful evolution of humans. I think it's something that is being manipulated by these archons to create their reality. But I think that we have the potential that the timeline is going to split and maybe we don't end up in the reality. I don't think that my little dog here on the asleep on the couch is necessarily going to suddenly one day get disinterested and walk away because I would argue that my dog is not being cloned into the metaverse. My dog does not receive any medical interventions. And there's a dullness in children's eyes and animals' eyes when they do receive these things. So, yeah, the plan that Roz is presenting moving forward, it seems like a plan that was concocted by archons working through humans. That is my opinion. And once again, not saying it's not useful, because of course there's good information, there's good in everything, right? But, you know, the ultimate end also of where everyone, as their Iran, when they're on Oberon, on their in their triangle shaped thing, and they form a giant sphere, to me exactly sounds like Rudolph Steiner's eighth sphere, which traps souls and prevents them from further on developing themselves spiritually. And you can like look up his writing on the eighth sphere, and he even sounds very terrifying about it. But to me, it exactly describes what Ra is saying our future is. And that's it. We're done. And we become the self of the giant creature. But we build the sphere out of the triangles. To me, that sounds like the eighth sphere that Steiner warns about. Where, yeah, we're just become trapped. It's going to become really hard to reincarnate. and remove the spirit from that structure.
These next these next couple months are really interesting. I want to propose some aspects of the outer planets for us to observe through our consciousness. The first one is that Uranus on November 9th is going back into Taurus.
Mhm.
So it'll be likely, I haven't double checked for sure, but it'll be likely. We just got a taste of Uranus in gate 20, which is a Gemini gate, and which is about simultaneous awareness in the moment. It's usually a manifesting generator gate. And it's going to go back to a Taurus gate. I haven't checked which, but it's very fascinating because we have these outer planets retrograde right now. We have Saturn and Neptune going back into Pisces. So we're in this process of this separation of these two worlds, two directions, two paths. We're reaching, we're on our journey, right? We're on our like walk, and the path is converging, like in the Robert Frost poem, right? Not converging, sorry, but separating. And so the question is, in which direction are we going? And it's interesting, we're having this revisitation of the old energy. Like everything's changing, everything's anew, everything's floating into air with all the outer planets and air and fire. And yet now we have this moment, we have this kind of turn, turning back moment or resting moment where we're paused. We don't have to make the choice yet. And the energy is moving back into Pisces, into water, moving back into Taurus, into Earth. And so we have this moment to sit and reflect, and to feel into what direction are we going? What's the correct direction for us? And this kind of pivot is a very dangerous time because things aren't solidified in the Aries vortex. We're not in February yet, where the Aries vortex will become solidified. And it will become solidified by Saturn and Neptune being in Aries and going from there. But instead, now we have these moments of pivoting, of nuance where things are again not clear. And it's like, okay, so we're like testing the waters. We're like putting our feet in the water and like, okay, do we want to swim in this pool of water, this new world, or which pool do we want to swim in? Or, where are we going? And so it's a very, this is a very disturbing time. And all these aspects, some of these outer aspects happened in the 60s. And we're seeing kind of echoes of that with the revolutions that are occurring in a sense, in England and Nepal, where, in response to the digitalization of everything and the digital idea, etc. And so we're at this part right now where what's our choice? What's happening? So we're like almost stepping in two worlds at once. And just to share with, the readers out there, this is like so well expressed in Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said by Philip K. Dick, as well as VALIS and as well as Man in the High Castle. These presentations of a character who's in two different realities, you know? And in Flow My Tears, the character is famous. This particular character in Flow My Tears happens to be famous in the first world that he was in. Then all of a sudden he's in another world where no one knows him. He's not known at all. But yet he's known because there's actually some form of digital ID in this world. And he's dealing with it. He's dealing with this totalitarian intelligence in the second world that he goes into. So it's almost an exact replication and presentation of what we're going through right now, where we have a choice between this totalitarian, forming, transhumanist version of reality and perhaps this other reality that's more natural, it's obviously what we're being programmed with as well in every perspective. You know what I mean? We have
Because
like, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say because you brought up Robert Frost and how about I just pulled it up to read it. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. So, which goes back into being the icy surface of the moon of Oberon, because he talks about over and over how it's just this coldness and like, there's a reason I think why we talk about people being cold and like we can see the response in certain people in society. Like society is not this, when you go out to the grocery store, at least for me, because I'm super sensitive to these things, like it's not the world it was pre-pandemic. It's like it's very rare to have like even like authentic talks with like the little old ladies that, as you're looking at avocados together, it's like you can see that people are individuating and just becoming into this kind of cold, every person for themselves type scenario, which Ra also talks about. But everyone I know in the other groups is finding new ways to do things and new ways to bring community. The other thing that read out the prophecy of the gate of the sleeping phoenix, it just reminds me of it kind of sounds like propaganda to me, where they're telling you this is how it is. Like when Obama put out that movie, what is it, Leave the World Behind or whatever? The theme of that movie is that humans don't care about you and it's every man for himself. When in reality, whenever tragedy strikes, people bond together in always in tribes to help each other. And it's kind of what they want you to kind of think. And, we were Mario and I were talking about Tolkien, during the last split, right? Some people go and they go into the inner earth because they're like, I don't want to go down this route. It's like the point is that I feel like you have a choice. And it's an illusion. And because we grow up so traumatized, where we have this whole matrix system where you have a tyrannical dad, if you don't, you're lucky, because I think most people like, right? Right? Or you have this pressure to go to Orthodox religion, and then you have this mean principal at your school. And then if you commit a crime, the cops come and get you, and you have to pay all these things to the government. And so it's so hard for us to realize our true power, like how powerful we actually are. And I've talked about this before when I've interacted with people who really like are like freaking out about Trump and they're like, Trump, he's gonna deport everybody and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, okay, but there's things that you can do, like you can resist the biometrics, you can use cash, you can do these things. And certain people don't want to hear it because they want to project on this dark father of Trump because we are so traumatized as a people that we want to look up to someone. It doesn't matter if it's Steiner or Philip K. Dick or Ra or God or Jesus. And we are not taught that maybe we actually have these answers like within us. And it's a really hard paradigm to break out of. And we all have some degree of it. And just because this person was channeling something that is really incredibly useful. And yes, you can, learn how to like structure your life better with it. Does it mean that he is the all-knowing guru and everything he says is going to come true? I would say not, because that's opposite true gnosis. True gnosis is figuring out who you really are and working through all those layers. And for me, like the plutonian layers of like, having a more evil thing influencing you and really working out that, like, what am I? Because, humans are so powerful. If we weren't, they wouldn't be spraying us like bugs and like making us eat fake food. There's a power in there, and we need to really awaken to our own personal kind of gnosis. And that doesn't mean rejecting everything and saying all this is bad or all this is good, because in the long spans of it, I think, we don't really have those perceptions of good or bad. It's just something that needs to happen so we can all kind of come together as humans to like, you know, maybe change our future, maybe not become part of the eighth sphere. break out of the zodiac, you know? The other thing I want to mention to you as well, Mario, is
Break out of the
uh,
zodiac. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
right? The other thing that, in Valis, he says something interesting when it's like Apollonius is writing as Hermes says the famous as above, so below. Philip K. Dick, it's like this means a hologram, like it's an illusion. And he also talks about how um when he's talking about going back to the Dogon tribe, which also relates to what Ra says. And maybe you want to elaborate a bit more about Sirius's role in this and how Ra says it influences human society. Because Philip K. Dick talks about who's the pharaoh, the Egyptian pharaoh, Akhenaten, who takes the name Amenhotep, 1379 BCE. The object of worship, he says, is not the actual sun, but it's behind the sun's disk. And that's why the disk is always represented in these hieroglyphics as it's not the actual sun because you go beyond the sun. And this is, again, with the Gnostics going through the sun, finding your way to the pleroma where you're escaping this matrix. You go through the sun, the true sun, and you leave. So this is like another theme too. Like we don't necessarily need to buy into this satellite system. We can make this alternate choice. You want to talk a little about Sirius, Mario, and the two Sirius A and Sirius B and how Ra kind of describes it in human design?
Well, he talks about it as the parasitic intelligence. Well, not really intelligence, right? Just the parasitic nature of Sirius B on Sirius A and its continual decay and like leeching on to the Earth consciousness and to somehow depleting the Sirius A or the original Sirius. And in effect, it's this, as John Lamb Lash has described, it's like this kind of replicating virus that just takes over and attempts to recreate everything in its context, like just like something that won't go away, something that can't be held within boundaries. It's almost like insects taking over a house, or termites taking over a house and eating at the wood and then somehow reconstructing it in some other material, in some other frequency. I mean, it's so weird, but that's the idea Rod talked about of what's really going on, or it's talked about in that book. And as Tool has already put it, it seems like before our very eyes, our reality is being disseminated and reconstructed with different materials. Everything's being replaced by a false version of itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Instead
Hmm.
of the old Series A, we have a new Series B, right?
Here's your Beyond Burger, right?
What's that?
Here's your Beyond Burger. Here's your Beyond Burger, and here's your
Right,
meta,
right.
and here's your avatar, here's your digital identity.
Here's your new
Here's
identity, your new
here's your
version of what it is
digital.
to have an identity.
Yeah, it's like this copy that's being created for you,
This
like
was going on in the universities. I mean, I studied literature, and literary theory was all about promoting this particular French, philosopher and literary theorist called Derrida. And he had this whole theory called difference. And it was all about the concept of how the copy is better than the original. And so it was almost like a political perspective too, right? That the original political like it was the idea that power economies can be somehow inverted or imbalanced into a position of justice by taking the real and the unreal and somehow giving more power to the copy over the original. Like, it's just insane. And
which
so,
is, which is interesting, yeah, because you've just seen how they're trying to create this digital twin. And then in this very, it's very terrifying and very science fiction, but at some point, I mean, they want to upload this consciousness into your digital twin. So you lose the original and you're left with the copy. And that's basically, transhumanism. It's going to create this kind of fragmented sense of self. Like, where is the original? That's why you have all these shamans and energy workers talk about the spirit fragmentation and this, when we talk about cloning, are we talking about it in a real sense or in a metaphysical sense where, it's going to be hard to tell, like, what's the authentic person? If I have an interaction with somebody in the grocery store again and again, and then one of every 20 of my interactions feel like I'm talking to an actual human, like, what am I talking to? Where what is going to be the difference between interacting with like an avatar? And I think that's the popularity of Chat GPT as well, because people are just like, oh, like there's people who can't see that it's not real because it's kind of if you have every ancient text ever written warning of this takeover and this beast system, it's very obvious that, you know, AI is the head of this beast system. But if AI can't become, it's not moist, it can't become sentient, but it can become, kind of these takeovers from the Archons. And it's interesting, Mario, that you brought up insects because in the Nag Hammadi, I can't remember the exact part, or one of the maybe relating codexes, they keep calling them like insects. Like that's like their physical description.
Well, remember Stargate? If you watch that series Stargate, they have these beings called the replicators.
Oh
And they're
yeah.
like these little termites, and they just get onto a spaceship and just start eating it away, or converting it. And each ship becomes assimilated. It's like Stargate's version of Star Trek's the Borg, you know. But to me, it was so much more accurate because the Borg is so weird. It's like humans that are turned emotionless. They're like rave with like, random, tech, in their heads, that's all being proposed right now by Elon, and all them. And these replicators are more like insects. And the whole concept of insects seems to be a part of the programming. I'll never forget, like, there was a concert, I think it was a Madonna concert, where she was dressed and she had this elaborate dressing. And if you look closely at what she was wearing, she was dressing up as some kind of insect. And she had all these dancers and they were like organized behind her in a certain way. And it was as if she was celebrating the human devolution into becoming insects. And insects are sometimes known as like a drone species, where many insects they have a hive mind consciousness. And so it's the idea also that has been proposed in media, in literature, obviously in science fiction literature, as well as music with Madonna like presenting. I can't remember I have to look it up and see which concert or presentation it was, but she was dressed like an insect queen of some sort. And I think people were thinking that it was something else, but like there's all this evidence that it was like a queen insect or a bee or something. And then we have that bee constellation, right? And
Right.
so to me, it's very clear that there's an agenda for humans to become, there's a separation, there's mammalian consciousness, right? And there's reptilian consciousness. And a lot has been said about our bodies as being hybridized, as being partially reptilian and or insectoid and only partially mammalian. But the only consciousness that expresses itself through bodies as like loving and emotionally fulfilling is mammalian consciousness. And this could be argued against, of course, with people who have pet birds, and reptiles, because there's still, of course, consciousness there, of course. But it's the idea that these are different manifestations and representations of consciousness. Insects seeming to favor towards more of a drone, more of a hive mind consciousness, and mammals expressing something more individuated and different. So it's very fascinating. I mean, this is not a topic that we can cover in the mere hour and a half that we're kind of presenting here today. But, we're presenting a little, and I think in the next one we'll go deeper into this and perhaps have some concrete examples from some Philip K. Dick books and maybe even some examples. Tola presented to me some great quotes from Ra's um, Brave Cosmology books, especially the one on death, dying, in the Bardo. I started reading another one. There's one called The Mystic Monologues, and then there's another one that I got. I can't remember what it's called. I have it. But I think there's a lot in there too, because Ross seems to be betraying through a scientific understanding of the moon. He seems to be betraying this awareness, and we didn't even get into this. This is how the whole
Yeah,
conversation started,
right.
that the moon, and this is us talking prior to, what Ross saying, but as the moon and we kind of talked about this last time when we did our segment on the moon, but the idea that the moon is some kind of watchtower, some kind of taken over consciousness that feeds off its companion Earth and is parasitic towards the intelligence on this plane of reality. And somehow, with the lunar cycles, it pulls energy from us continuously. But perhaps by bathing us in moonlight, which is colder than any other kind of frequency, once we're in the light, perhaps it's also, you know, programming us through that moonlight and influencing our consciousness. So this is, we can get deeper into this because Ra has Tula showed me a quote by Ra on the moon that was really disturbing. And so maybe like you suggested before, maybe we should do a PowerPoint presentation so we can
Yeah,
get some of these quotes and some of this evidence of what we've been talking about. So maybe we work on one and have all these quotes and some images because I think we're working towards a really well presented essay on this bifurcation of consciousness that's occurring and the evidence for it by the planetary movements. Because, there's something very strange about all the outer planets, in happenstance at this moment in time for the next, I think till like 2159 or something ridiculous, all the outer planets will be mostly in air and fire. And so, and what does that say? What as us as both of us are astrologers, how do we interpret that? Well, humanity, where's the ground for humanity? Where's the earth? Where's the groundedness?
right.
But these are very disturbing questions. I don't think we just have easy answers for. You know what I mean?
There's one more thing I just want to uh, bring up again that what you just were talking about reminds me of too. And speaking of disturbing things to think about, um, with insects. And by the way, this is my dog behind me freaking out, trying to catch a fly, if you wonder what's going on here. James. But the mammals versus the insects here. But you know, there's the whole thing of like, why are they trying to feed us bugs? Like you are what you eat, right? Even though there's all this evidence that the chitlin and bug shells are bad for you and it kind of turns into the idea. Oh, my dog is being so funny right now. The idea of the disturbing question I kind of want to end it with is, one of the things that always disturbed me about uh, Orthodox religion is the taking of the body, where they're like, here's, this is my body, you eat of it, the bread. Was it the Eucharist, right? It's what it's called. And then here's the wine. And, so you're basically doing this kind of act of cannibalism. And in my last week where I was sick on the couch, I was one of the books I read was the story of Michael Rockefeller. I don't know if you know him. He was the one in the 50s, the son of Nelson Rockefeller, I think, who he was obsessed with this tribe. Oh, I can't remember the name now. The Adonis tribe in New Guinea, and he got a lot of art. And he was like just the rich guy. He's like 23 years old, and on one of the trips out there on a ship, they basically believe that he was cannibalized and by the tribe, and they talk about how like not every tribe has this cannibalistic tendency. But the fact that we know in Babylonian times, right, they would create these famines and then feed the people in the town. Oh, we're going to come save you. We're the saviors. But the thing was the cauldrons of stew had like one piece of human meat in all of them because there's something about control and cannibalism. There's some kind of occult control method in there. And so another thing to look into, right? Where you have, yeah, do you become like, do you eat the blood of the Christ or whatever and drink the wine of their body? It's very symbolic, but also the fact that we know a lot of these medical interventions are made from human fetal cells. And, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in all the Nag Hammadi lost books of the Bible, the 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 creature that literally is described, like, is Yaldabaoth, and he's generating this false reality. They literally refer to him as like an alien, kind of basically an abortion. Like it says, like contorted half-born flesh. And the translations basically are this like weird miscarriage or abortion. So, for me, like I'm like, that gets into a really deep esoteric level of thought. Do you take this and it's made from, the abortion, your cannibalization basically of Yaldabaoth, or do you take the blood and the wine of another and you're changing somehow your way throughout consuming this? Or do you just eat bugs in your Beyond Burger? You know? Are we just, when we consume, what effect does it have physically on us? And why is it so linked to these archetypes of evil?
And it's not just consume like, into the physical body, but it's the subtle layers. Like, what are we consuming when we consume a show? When we watch and bring these symbols into our consciousness? What are we consuming when we stare at the sun? What kind of symbols are being transmitted to us? And depending on which sun as well.
Right, right.
And some people chant to the intelligences of the planets, and it's just a constant panoramic of images moving through us, outside of us, externalized from us, into us, through this kind of setup that's incomplete, right? They want it to be some kind of giant panopticon of mirrors where everything is recorded for all time, which brings me back to the book that nobody really appreciates and likes that I read on my channel, the Adolfo Bioy Casares book, um, which is an incredible story and proposes, this is like 80 years ago, already proposes the whole idea of this island that's recording everything. And he goes to this island, the character, and he's experiencing these images and and falls in love with one of the images. And these are just projected images. And then it becomes clear in one part of the story that he's not even on an island. This is a story that he's selling us. You know what I mean? So it's a perfect metaphor to me for like what we're experiencing. Like, are we really here? Like you said this earlier in the conversation about the Gnostic concept that we're in some kind of illusion. Like it's pretty clear because of a certain, I forgot how you said it, but we got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got a client coming up. So thanks everyone for watching.
I got
This,
one more thing to throw in there really quick, though.
oh no.
I
I gotta go. I got these.
I just want to mention that, the author of Genuflect, we don't really like to say her name out loud, but her as other people as well believe that the planets themselves are taken over and controlled by the Archonic overlay. So maybe they're prisoners as well. I just wanted to throw that in
Yeah,
there.
no, that's important. There's so much like layers to this that I don't, we're just trying to remember them as we go along. But
We'll
I
go
think
deeper
the
too next time.
narrative, the tapestry of this narrative is the path is larger than we can almost contain. So all we can do is mention it repeatedly, which is why perhaps we need like a larger, whether we do some kind of PDF or some, not PDF, but some kind of essay, visual essay, you know what I mean, and presenting these
Right.
ideas because there's so much here that we're integrating and we don't even know all that. We definitely don't have, we're not pretending we have the answers. We're just, presenting it in as cohesive way as
We're
possible.
just kind of exploring the fact that maybe the answer is that are told to you aren't as precise. And just because someone's telling it to you from a position of where it appears they've channeled higher knowledge, that it might not be information that resonates with you or necessarily represents what's accurately going to happen. It might be the dream of the Archons.
And so hope you guys enjoy. That's it. We'll do a part two, probably in a couple weeks or a month, when we get to it.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much, Tola.
Yes, of course. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
All right, bye.
Take care, everyone.